So it's good to be back on the Colorado Plateau because this is actually where I became a writer. And in the olden days, 20 or 25 years ago, when this was still a bookstore, a regular bookstore with regular opening hours, we always used to stop by for a cup of coffee on the way to and from the canyons. I always liked the atmosphere here. And so I never thought in those days that I'd end up being in here as one of the writers whose books are for sale here and actually been doing a presentation. In a way, or not in a way, actually the Colorado Plateau and specifically Glen Canyon is what turned me into a writer. At the time, was it late 1990s, I was working in various youth programs outward bound over there in Moab and AYE here in Loa with the at-risk youth. Got to spend a lot of time in the canyons, and even before that I had read somewhere, and I don't even remember the source, that when they flooded the Colorado River, when they built Glen Canyon Dam, that 120 side canyons were flooded. Now they're coming back, some of them, with a lake being as low as it is. But that number always stuck with me for some reason, like a burr under my saddle or a pebble in my boot, you know. And I got to the point where I thought, 120, what does that actually mean? You know, it's just a number on paper. It's kind of relatively abstract. And so I got the idea that I wanted to go out and see 120 canyons within 1 year. And since I had good off rotations, I always was working 10 days on, 10 days off sort of. That allowed me, and I was already here in the region, it allowed me to explore a lot of these canyons. Well, I got a little carried away. I ended up quitting those jobs just so I could get the 120 canyons in a year. And it wasn't the canyons that were drowned or partially drowned by the damming of the Colorado, but it still gave me a real good idea of the diversity, because every canyon is different from the next as a person is from the next. And so I was just keeping notes, journals, you know, while I was doing this, and not even with the intention of ever publishing anything up to that point other than academic papers. I had never published a word of writing. And at some point I realized that it wasn't just the damming of the Colorado that caused the major damage. That was just the most, maybe, I don't know, a significant event, or the most that got the most publicity. But there was still a lot of development going on, and we're still losing these wild places on a daily basis, you know, to mining, overgrazing, other forms of development. Now a lot of areas are being privatized and turned into subdivisions. And also, unfortunately, and I know what I speak of because I worked for 25 years as a wilderness guide on the Colorado Plateau in Alaska. Also now we're seeing industrial tourism, which also is really hammering some of these places, especially during these government shutdowns when there's reduced or no staff. And for some people it seems to be free for all. They just go in and cut down trees and break into visitor centers. So I guess at this point I don't have to tell you what my politics are. You see on my shirt here, that's why I always wear the shirt. Anyway, so seeing that there was a lot more going on and feeling that there was maybe something that people needed to be aware of and would be interested in hearing about, I tried then to sort of like organize these notes into kind of a book. Of course, nobody wanted to hear about 120 different canyons, right? It gets a little monotonous, so that didn't amount to much at first. And I had the project shelved already, given up on it. And here's where another small bookstore played an important role in my life. I was living in Moab at the time, and I knew the manager, Hossein Knighton. He was a real knowledgeable guy and also spent a lot of time out in the canyons. And one day I was in there browsing the shelves, and he said, "Hey, you need to come over here. There's a German guy you need to talk to." And I said, "Okay, I don't mind talking to German. You know, I used to talk to Germans quite a bit." And so it was this photographer from Germany who was doing a coffee table book about the Colorado Plateau. He was traveling what they call the Grand Circle Tour. And he was kind of said, "You know, I got this coffee table book under contract with a German publisher, but I don't have a text to go with it. I'm not a writer." And I said, "Well, that's funny because I fancied myself as a writer, and I got this manuscript about 120 canyons sitting on the shelf gathering dust." And so I pulled it off the shelf and looked through it, and, you know, did some moving around and excerpted, and part of that then became the introduction to that German coffee table book and was published in Germany, I hear. And what it did for me was actually gave me sort of like a second impetus that maybe I can do this, maybe I'm a writer or could be a writer, and maybe this is worth, what people I might actually be interested in. So I got a few people that I sent it out and got some feedback from writers that I admire, and long story short, it turned into my first book, Where the Rain Children Sleep. It was published in 2001. And after that, I was really sold on the whole writing thing, which isn't always a good thing when you're trying to make a living, actually. The other thing that happened throughout the years, I got more and more involved in not just what goes into a book, but also the looks of a book. And there's that old saw, a cover. You can't judge a book by a cover. And it's not always true, but ideally, when the cover really matches the contents, which it should, then you can, Unfortunately, some of the publishers and the marketing departments in publishing houses, they have a big say in what the cover is going to look like. And those people, unfortunately, sometimes haven't even read the entire book. They just go by what the author pitched in their proposal. And so they come up with something that they think they would appeal to people, but I never felt really good about that. And I got really involved, much to the dismay of some of my publishers. I got very involved in actually the looks of my book or my books. And fortunately, I had a great mentor, my wife, Melissa. She used to work as a graphic designer for many years, and we ended up collaborating on various book projects together. And so she taught me what little I know and what taste I have now, because I had atrocious taste. I used papyrus, which is a horrible typeface, but you see it all over. It's sort of the New Age typeface. It looked like somebody took a sword and chopped, so Asian looking. You've probably seen it. And now I cringe when I see papyrus, especially on the book cover. So the first reading I want to do tonight is actually not, so I'm kind of here to promote, if you will, two books that were both published last year by me. One is No Walk in the Park, Seeking Thrills, Eco-Wisdom, and Legacies in the Grand Canyon. So that's a collection of essays centered on the Grand Canyon, but the chapters aren't all set in the Grand Canyon. There's a bunch in other Utah public lands, including Cataract Canyon, but the Grand Canyon is definitely the center of this book, and surrounding areas like the Paria and the Vermilion Cliffs Wilderness and so on. And that was published last year, and it got the Utah Book Award, Memorable Read, or whatever they call it this year. And then the other one was also published last summer, and that's Arctic Traverse, my Alaska memoir. And that was based on a dream project that I had for many, many years. I've been putting it off year after year after year because it was such a major endeavor, especially if you do it by yourself, and also logistically and financially. And so basically it chronicles a solo trip that I did from the Canadian border in the Arctic. It's entirely in the Arctic. It's called Arctic Traverse. Started at the Canadian border and then ended up at the Bering Strait in a town called Kotzebue. And that followed basically this big mountain range that's east-west in the Arctic. It's the only major Arctic mountain range in the world, and it's north of the Arctic Circle. It's called the Brooks Range. A lot of Alaskans have never even heard of it. And if you imagine you're coming up the Continental Divide, the spine of the Rockies, and then once you get into northern Canada, the Yukon, it doglegs, and it runs instead of running north to south, it runs east to west, and that's the Brooks Range. And then at the end, when you get to the Bering Strait, that's basically the end of the line and the end of the Rocky Mountains and the edge of the continent. And Melissa and I, we were actually fortunate. At the time I wrote this, I lived in Fairbanks, but also the years before, we were fortunate enough to live in Nome, Western Alaska, which is right on the edge of you can't see Russia from there, but it feels like you should or you could. And so it was a really crazy place. That's actually my new book I have out that I just published this summer. It's called No Place Like Nome. Anyway, those are the two that I have here tonight. And since I was talking a little bit about the making of the books, the actual physical object of a book, I want to read a a piece about how this cover for No Walk in the Park came together, which I think is actually a pretty neat story, and it's not in the book, so that's your bonus content there. It's also, we're such a visually oriented society now, image, 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 and sometimes I wonder if you can even do a talk or a presentation or a reading without having some kind of like slide presentation. That other old saw that you probably heard is the picture says more than 1,000 words. Well, I do love photography and painting, but when I hear that, I say, if that's true, then I'm not doing a good job as a writer. If I can't do 1,000 words what a picture, I think I should actually do more with 1,000 words than a picture. I should say more, and I think I can, because think about it, with an image, you just have the visual. But as a writer, I can talk about the visual, I can talk about the auditory, what I hear, I can talk about what I smell, I can talk about what I feel, what I touch, tactile, and I can talk about what's going on inside of me. Of course, a good photographer is also able to bring some of that into his or her photography, but I'm getting a little burned out on the whole image thing. That's why this cover story about the cover of the book is actually kind of ironic for me. It's called Alignments. As a nonfiction writer with a passion for history and adventure, I sometimes tap webs that link individuals over centuries, millennia even, and thousands of miles apart, individuals otherwise not connected. For the cover of my new collection of Grand Canyon essays, No Walk in the Park, I sought an immersive photo from deep within the guts of the great abyss, one that would offer a bottom perspective unlike the abstracted scrimshaw beheld from the rim's viewpoint. Besides beauty, I wanted readers to glimpse the human past in this place, the risk, hardship, and grit, the continuity between canyoneers then and now. I had long been a fan of early 19th century black and white photos taken before and after the Inverse Mountain became a national park in 1919. Many featured tourists that started to flock to this vertical wonderland by rail, or once Route 66 tied it into the road system by car. There were stills of a Tin Lizzie Model T Ford parked precariously near the edge, and of a hatted, skirted matron who leans and peers over the lip, pointing breathlessly at the inner gorge, while a second, in a fur coat, grabs the hem of her friend's cape. Snow mantles the chasm all the way down to the aprons near the Tonto platform, and the gawker does not wear sensible shoes. By far the most exciting shots, including many from below the rim, were the lens work of the two Kolb brothers, proto-influencers who ran a studio on the South Rim, making a living by picturing dudes descending on muleback and selling them the prints upon their return. Hailing from Pittsburgh, Ellsworth and Emery had boated the length of the canyon and more on a hardcore trip from Wyoming to the Gulf of California in 1911, bagging the first ever footage of the gorge's rapids. The reels they brought home and for decades showed at the studio still are America's longest running film. The Kolbs went the extra mile, literally, for that special frisson or angle. In the autumn of 1930, Ellsworth and his brother Emery tried to enter the cave at the head of Clear Creek, above the inner gorge, not too far from Phantom Ranch, from which spring mysteriously intermittent Chivaya Falls. A tour guide acquaintance of the Kolbs at a distance mistook the falls for a big sheet of ice. After verifying by telescope that it was unfrozen water, the Kolbs rigged a boom and pulley system above the North Rim's red wall to access it. As the elder brother, Ellsworth decided he'd take the plunge. A heavy storm was brewing, and they were out of food and water, so he took a canteen. With him only halfway down, a spider on a silk thread 1,000 feet above Clear Creek's bed, one of the most terrific rain and hailstorms either had ever experienced struck. The wind was so strong that Emery feared getting blown off the cliff. Following a search and rescue truism that a rescuer in a pickle becomes another casualty, Emery, tying the rope to a gnarled pinyon pine, left Big Brother hanging mid-air. Since the cliff was undercut, Emery later recalled, Ellsworth was prevented from steadying himself against the wall. This permitted the wind to whirl him around and round till the three wet ropes became one. During a lull, Ellsworth managed to gradually unwind himself, pushing against the cliff with the pole Emery lowered to him. By dark, the top man had the dangler back up on the belay platform after suffering an uncomfortable rupture from the strain of pulling. Ascending in the pitch black, they spent the night in another cave, hungry, tired, and wet. Knowing what I know of the brothers, they probably posed and grinned while Thor snapped pictures. Sifting online archives of the Klein's Library's special collections at the University of Northern Arizona in Flagstaff, I quickly settled on a clear winner for the cover. In it, the younger Cope steps defiantly up a rickety driftwood ladder that bridges narrows stories above the river. He seems to be wearing cavalry boots, a blousy shirt, and a small black-brimmed hat. Beholding it makes your palms sweat. I realized right away that the photo had been mislabeled as being from Kanab Creek. I knew the place depicted from river trips on which I had worked. I recognized the cove, here sepia-toned, as the turquoise grotto in which we always moored our rafts for day hikes with clients up the wonders of Havasu Creek. The stream behind Emery's figure was the Colorado, running muddy as it always did before Glen Canyon Dam. I could even determine the vantage from which Ellsworth had framed his brother. The trail skipping from limestone ledge to limestone ledge en route to this bare-bones landing. I had traipsed along it many times at the end of a sun-blasted day spent by the creek's glowing pools and Horsemane Falls. Mark Klett and Byron Wolfe are two other photographers whose oeuvre I admired. Their specialty is rephotography, or rather, collages of historical images and their own labor of angles and camera positions researched and meticulously reenacted. In a different context, rephotography documents environmental changes, or rarely sameness, through the hindsight of decades or a century. Klett and Wolfe's Grand Canyon work shines in the spellbinding, at times whimsical, Reconstructing the View, that's their book, a pictorial of double-page panoramas in which the shadows and light of the past merge with those of the present. The splendor, humor, and cleverness of those tableaus sparked the wish for a similar composition of my own for the cover of No Walk in the Park. You can look at it later. I wish I had a slide up for that, actually. It makes more sense what I'm talking about. Alas, at the time I lived in Fairbanks, Alaska. A trip south to rephotograph the setting was out of the question, though I felt that I had the exact location nailed down. There was no money for artwork in the publisher's budget, and the catalog showcasing my book's cover would go to the printer in less than 2 weeks. I trawled the internet listlessly for a suitable image, like a fisherman would an overfished or acidified sea. Within minutes, I did a double take. I clicked on and enlarged a vertical, crisp, well-lit shot of the very same place. Havasu's waters pulsed neon blue in the depths, joining a Rio Muy Colorado, both bracketed by the salmon flesh limestone of the 350 million year old Redwall Formation. To boot, I could grab a high resolution print quality Flickr file which came with a Creative Commons license permitting use of the image. As it turned out, a Grand Canyon Park ranger on a team building trip had pushed the shutter button. She described Havasu's unearthly hue to me as a color you'd only find inside the glass of a Las Vegas cocktail or a gummy worm candy. Another writer there with a missed opportunity to become a writer. When I cropped Emery inside a grayscale circle, suggesting the view field of a spotting scope on an overlook, which I then moved across Erin's photo on my computer screen, it locked into a place where it almost perfectly fit. Even Havasu's cliffs were lining up. It was uncanny, despite the fact that the trail near the mouth of Havasu has few pullouts where an artist might step off trail and pause, contemplate, and capture this priceless scene. Strands of visual creativity now bind me to Ellsworth and Emery, to Erin and Byron and Mark, a gossamer circle holding distant strangers. Alas, the hunt for the perfect picture has a coda. The university press balked at my idea, or perhaps just at too much author involvement. Their counter comps, and comp is designer logo for comprehensive layouts, I learned from my wife, ran the gamut from horsey typography to a concept that reminded the press director of Emerson's transparent eyeball beholding the desert Southwest, but in me evoked Hunter S. Thompson's glazed by CBD. After repeated exchanges that did not yield any improved designs, I called it quits, kissing the modest advance goodbye, backing out of my contract over artistic differences. I then self-published the book, Terra Incognita for me, as the canyon at first had been to the coves. I've never felt more in charge of my vision. And that's how I went after 11 books published with regional and university presses to becoming a self-published author, and I'm really liking it. My wife calls me, not the official title for graphic designers at that level is art director, but she calls me the art dictator. Because I got these, when I have a title for the book, I already have a cover image that I'm seeing. So it worked out actually really nicely. And I don't have to jump through all these hoops. Like when I publish a book with the university press, it goes through peer review committee, and then they have to vote on the budget, and it just, but if you write anything that's halfway, is not referring to 350 million-year-old limestone, but that's a little more current. By the time the book comes out, it's not current anymore. Speaking of the visuals of books, we've also noticed the trend, my wife and I, in current books that are about the outdoors, and you may have seen that too. A lot of them recycle sort of an idea that the Park Service did in the 1930s for posters that were advertising the parks. It was the CCC hired artists, writers, and graphic artists to kind of publicize the parks when the roads were being built and the railroad accessed a lot of the parks. So there are these very geometrical shapes, simplified forms of the parks, iconic parts of the park, and these really popping colors. So you may have seen a lot of these books now around, and I think looking at some of them, actually, it's a shortcut for one thing, because I bet that a lot of those are now AI generated. And also, it's a moment, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, they will just look as dated as the ones from the 1930s. And we had another real fun afternoon where we actually gave verbal clues, and I didn't even know how to do that. We had to use Melissa's brother, who's working for Google and some of those companies, who knows how to use AI, and we gave clues, the title and some of the clues for No Walk in the Park, and it came out exactly like one of those poppy run-of-the-mill covers, except there were two wires going across the canyon, with a guy going across the canyon like that. So that shows me that my way, at least for myself, works a little better. Okay, let me drink of water. The desert, I forget how dry the desert is. So the other piece I want to read is actually from the book. It's an essay called Dancing the Rain, and it's about a visit. I was fortunate to be invited, because now a lot of these ceremonies are by invitation only on the Hopi reservation. There are social dances which are open to the public, and then there are the more ceremonially important ritualistic dances or ceremonies. The dance is always part of a ceremony. They just don't dance for fun. And there you actually have to have an invitation, and I was lucky enough to be invited. And it was nice to come back there, just like it's nice to come back here, because it had sentimental value, because Hopi Mesas is, and for those of you who don't know where they are, they're in northeastern Arizona, a little north of Flagstaff, a little south of the state line to Utah. The special meaning was that in 1982, when I first came to the United States, I came as a tourist, and I had a half a year where I was traveling the Southwest, a lot of it hitchhiking, and ended up down there in Guatemala when it got too cold up here in the fall. Anyway, I was, and I talked a little bit about that in the piece. The Hopi were the first Native Americans I met face to face. And you know, coming from Germany, that was a big deal for me. And I strongly believe that experience, and then a few more I had with Native people down in Mexico and in other places, eventually channeled me into the career I chose, which is my real career that I actually had to go to school for, not just made up. My background is in cultural anthropology, and so it was based on these times that I got to spend immersed with these indigenous peoples. And I remember another one experience I had was down in Mexico in the Yucatan. It was the coast off the Yucatan, off the mainland, and there was only a biological research station. They were studying frigate birds, and then seasonal, they were Mexican, and they were Mayan, descendants of Mayans, fishermen. And I spoke hardly any, they didn't speak much Spanish either. My Spanish sucked, but we had a great time. And so it's these, you know, and I was just totally blown away by the United States too. I've never been there before. And this whole idea of public lands, and you could just camp in these amazing places, and you know, that they belonged really to everybody. And sometimes I think Americans don't appreciate that enough, take it too much for granted, you know, till it gets taken away or developed or closed. Anyway, so that time on the Hopi Mesa, it's not the time that I'm talking about here in this piece, but that was really, really formative experience for me. So this one is called Dancing the Rain. I'm sorry, I apologize if there's any Hopi speakers in the audience if I butcher some of these names. A drum steady as a metronome announces the procession. The still February air buzzes with anticipation, and my goosebumps are not from the cold. I am packed shoulder to shoulder with raven-haired people on a flat roof in Muonkapi, the place of running water waiting to fall out of time. Owl hoots join the drum, and then hail on flagstones, rattling from deer hooves, seeds, turtle shells. Here they come, the crush of masked bodies clad in the land's minerals, bright as hummingbirds, feathers and fur swaying, pounding bare ground with bare feet, inflating cloud bellows and bringing up seedlings with each stomp. This is Powamua, the start of the Hopi ceremonial year and first appearance of the Katsina spirits since their winter retreat to the San Francisco peaks outside of Flagstaff. I am in Moenkopi with a few river guides and Grand Canyon National Park staff as part of a collaborative arrangement between the park, river outfitters, and tribal groups. Through cultural immersion, this program seeks to increase our understanding of tribes affiliated with the canyon. Its practical goal is to enrich the interpretation of a cultural landscape by including First Peoples perspectives. Fortunately, we are not on our own. William Talashoma, a river guide and interpreter from Moenkopi, shepherds us through the maze of Hopi etiquette and beliefs. For a change, we guides are the guided ones, feeling like babes in the desert. On our way to the village, we briefly stopped at Cameron, near the lip of the Little Colorado River's gorge. There, William recounted his people's emergence from previous worlds, destroyed by ice, fire, and flood, into this present and final one. The place of emergence lies down canyon, near the confluence with the Colorado, where a travertine dome housing a spring swells from the riverbank like an earthen breast. Its Hopi name, Sipapuni, translates as navel or umbilical cord. William thinks of it as a symbol of rebirth, highlighting the fact that, like all of our food, we come from the earth. The Sipapuni evokes our ascent from primordial muck to consciousness. Fittingly, the souls of the dead return to this gateway for their journey home. As a navigational landmark, it pegs the tribes surfacing from the canyon's depths onto the mesa tops after epic migrations across the southwest that follows the last emergence. At Moenkopi, we parked our van bumper to bumper with cars by the side of a congested dirt road. Down that road, single-story houses hunkered between 10 bluffs and the washed-dormant cornfields. We followed a trickle of visitors toward the lower village to the cottonwood-shaded spring that gave the village its name and still gives it life. Offerings had been left in a shrine-like niche. Turkey feathers tied with white cotton string, a broken rattle, yellow cornmeal, carved prayer sticks, both male and female kinds painted turquoise. I stooped to pick up a gray corrugated potsherd that could have been 1,000 years old. Though Moenkopi only dates back to 1870, the Hopi's Motsinom ancestors probably worshipped there. As portals to the spirit world, springs did and still do hold meanings for people of the corn. We shared lunch with William's family, eating in shifts as the house was bursting with guests. On the porch, a boy played with a painted bow, a gift from the elemental beings, the Katsinas. We sat at a lunch counter where we were served piki, phyllo-thin blue cornbread baked on a heated stone slab. A girl with almond eyes and a shy smile warned me of the batch spiced with chilies. There was fry bread and beef soup with bean sprouts from the heirloom varieties for the occasion, grown in the underground secrecy of kivas, the clan's ceremonial chambers. Laughter erupted from the table around which elders and close families sat. In a dimly lit corner, an old-timer with mahogany skin reclined in a hospital bed, part of the proceedings. Corn, like the Sipapuni, situates the Hopi in the cosmos. Cornmeal paths radiate outward from the origin place, with ears of various colors associated with the directions. Yellow corn for the northwest, blue corn with the southwest, red corn with the southeast, white corn with the northeast, black corn with the above, and multicolored corn with the below. How poor by comparison is our placeless Monsanto-designed variety. Food should nourish the soul as well as the body, but too often nowadays we ignore the spiritually sustaining for the merely nutritious, the profitable or the faddish. The feast in this pueblo also was a reminder that food is about community, hospitality, obligations. Food simply cannot be separated from its social context. The Powamua, or bean dance, concludes a 16-day ceremony of creation. The Katsinas have arrived in force, helping the Hopis prepare for the growing season. And if the rituals are performed humbly and correctly, they will bring rain from the sacred peaks to the south. At the same time, it marks the initiation of young children into the entry-level Katsina society, preparing yet another generation for growth and maturity. The Hopis, for whom the world teems with sentient beings, would not be surprised to hear of scientists' recent findings that tomatoes and tobacco plants shaken by drought or suddenly wounded emit staccato ultrasounds resembling bubble wrap popping. The audible response, likely physiological, may stem from cavitation in the plant's tissues. But is a person's gasp of fear any less physical? These plant distress cries differ depending on the cause and may even affect nearby insects and other animals. Like the planet's progress solemnized in this hilltop community, my journey has come full circle. New to the country in 1983, I was hitchhiking across the Southwest when a Hopi who offered a ride invited me to visit with his family on Third Mesa. I stayed at his grandmother's house for a few days. A potter from the renowned Nampeyo lineage, she fired pots the traditional way, burying redware smooth as calabashes and webbed with black geometric designs to smolder on cedar logs inside a mound of dry sheep manure. Her grandson painted watercolors of katsinas in lifelike poses, and I bought a set, which now hangs in my study. That Hopi family's kindness helped kindle a decades-long love affair with the Colorado Plateau and fed an interest in the continent's first people that eventually led me to anthropology and north to Alaska. From the rooftop, I see initiates wearing nothing but blankets who stand with their godparent sponsors, sleep-deprived and hungry from their ordeal. Their near-nakedness signals humility, their bare feet a debt owed to the earth. They spent last night curled fetus-like in the kiva's womb below a cornmeal line painted on the wall, the path that Masau, the creator, expects them to follow. On the previous day, the katsinas had whipped them. When tears flushed their eyes, their godfathers had traded places with them, receiving the blows in their stead. This too a promise. If you walk the straight path, Masau will take on part of your suffering. Bloodshed in this continent is thicker than water. The Mudhead chorus now marches past with its dried clay masks, heads smooth as urns, eyes and mouths O-shaped as if in constant surprise. Their big-bellied drum hums in the pit of my stomach. In tune with the fertility theme, clown katsinas pretend to hump old women in the crowd. Black ogres chase Hopi tough guys trying to blacken their faces with soot. Other monsters go from door to door, threatening to eat children who have misbehaved and demanding fresh meat. Spectators who line the streets pluck feathers from the procession's wake, blessings the katsinas left in the dirt. Humor and horseplay mixed with awe and reverence take me by surprise. What I witness shows me that the sacred and the profane are as much part of a continuum in an eddying universe as the seasons and generations. Katsinas circle the village 4 times, always following the sun's daily and annual course. We'd call it clockwise, but abstract time detached from the body, has no function in rites linked to the earth. The dancers stop on every kiva roof where the clan priests consecrate them with cornmeal, feeding the spirits that have traveled so far. With each round, I recognize more characters in the melee of colors and forms. A Kokopelli katsina, a nympho according to William, sports a woman's kilt and the Hopi woman's twin whorl sculpted butterfly hairdo. A mocking katsina latches onto bystanders and the ranks of fellow katsinas, mimicking his target's every move, so like a mime. Dressed in cut-off jeans, modern footwear, hippie pendants, and a beaded vest, he resembles certain white men. A guard katsina in a checkered kilt points his yaka wand at me. Guards punish any transgression on the katsina's path, and it takes me a few seconds and the example of others on the roof to understand the request to remove my cap. A Heiheia katsina with a lasso tempts children by holding out woven baskets, katsina dolls, bundles of picky bread, or cookies on a string, snaring them when they reach for his gifts. This tempting with riches and the white-plumed spruce-ruffed snow katsina bring to mind a controversy that embroils my one-time hometown Flagstaff, an hour from here as the vulture soars. A ski resort operator plans to use wastewater to supply the barren slopes of the San Francisco peaks with snow there. Concerned residents, environmental organizations, and Hopi representatives have protested such waste and desecration, but it looks as if the city will go ahead anyhow. The range on the south rim of the Colorado Plateau, comprised in the Kachina Peaks wilderness, is Nuvatuyovi, the place of the high snows. Sadly, that name no longer seems appropriate. One of the deities to whom it is home, Nuvakchinmana, in change of cold weather and the white gift that saturates earth for the next year's crops. Could the multi-year drought that squeezes the West signal our straying from ground truths, from the straight path? Have we lost sight of priorities in the desert? Dancing for harmony in the world, the Pueblos are dancing for all of us. These days, wastewater snow for a Flagstaff ski resort defiles the peak's hallowed flanks. Many Hopis condemn snowmaking itself as sacrilegious, since it interferes with the natural water cycle. The effluent of the affluent includes runoff from mortuaries and hospitals, associated with death, disease, and spiritual contamination. One member of the tribe compared the practice to urinating on the altar at the Vatican, and anthropologists to baptizing babies with dishwater. The Grand Canyon's Hualapai fear that vile meltwater will seep into the ground and from there percolate into a sacred spring below the snow bowl. Indigenous mountain protectors from an intertribal alliance praying and protesting at the resort have been insulted, attacked by snowboarders, and arrested. For these tableland dwellers, springs and their source are linked to the health of the world and all things living in it. Like certain shrines, ruins, trails, cairns, and petroglyphs, ceremonial springs are footprints that Hopi ancestors left behind on their wanderings to the center place. Spring water is wild water in which benevolent water serpents dwell. A Katsina song that Emery Sekatapedeva, the Noah Webster of the Hopi Nation, recalled offers a Mesa perspective. They are preparing themselves over there at the snow-capped mountains, the clouds. From there, they are putting on their endowments to come here. Hopi women, children, and men after death become clouds. Skiers as well, and backpackers and river runners should understand the Katsina's cargo, those blessings from the departed as a divine endowment. Toward evening, we drive on to Shongopavi, perched on the spur of Second Mesa. Residents of Old Shongopavi relocated here after the Pueblo uprising of 1680, fearing Apache marauders and reprisals from the Spanish. Outside ideas, diseases, and trappings have taken their toll, but this village remains a stronghold of Hopi tradition. We shiver in sweaters and pile jackets while the supplicants brave the late winter chill bare-chested. There's less levity here, less chasing and teasing. Despite our lighter skin and self-conscious poses, nobody pays us any attention. A different cast of Katsinas shuffles through Shongopavi's still frozen mud, dwarfed by the wing-helmeted, somber crow mother. Yove, the Katsina that beheaded the Franciscan priest more than 300 years ago, wields an old saber. Memory runs deep on the mesas, as does the desire for restoration. A few people in the audience ask for canings to be cleansed and healed. It feels like a foreign place at the heart of America. But no, this is the ancient heart of America, wounded but resilient, vibrant, enduring, powered by and powering immemorial cycles. In a handout for the trip's participants, William had summarized the Hopi worldview. We must have constant prayer in our hearts from the minute we are awake till the time we are asleep. We must respect both the spirit and the creation. Hopi, William said at one point, is not a tribe, but a state of being. At last light, the main kiva swallows the host of katsinas. One by one, their feathered silhouettes sink into the roof hatch. Eventually, only the tip of the ladder that they descended protrudes above ground, angled at the first stars. The rooftops and streets quickly empty. As we walk back to the dirt parking lot, a TV like a blue eye flickers from a dark house with a satellite dish. Yeah, it's really the closest thing I've ever come to time travel, except for that last part, where you see the satellite dish. It could have been the same scene, could have played out like hundreds of years ago, when the Franciscans were there, or even before then. It's pretty impressive that exists side by side to this Main Street culture still. And as an anthropologist, I read a lot about smaller cultures really hanging in by the skin of their teeth, and the languages dying. There's these small languages that go defunct because the kids don't learn them anymore. And the old timers, a lot of them have been through boarding schools, government schools, where they were punished to speak their own language. And then, ironically, when the government became a little more enlightened, and they were trying to revive these traditions, then they were encouraged, they were given grants. But once that missing link, that intermediate generation doesn't speak the language anymore, the chance is very slim. And another thing I have to think about, we see that in Alaska a lot too, when and I've guided people to some of these native villages up there, and they come in and they see, they got four-wheelers, they live in modern housing, they got trucks, they watch TV, they have baseball caps and dress like us, so they are like us. And nothing could be further from the truth. You cannot judge a culture by the technology that uses. Once you get to know these people, there are still beliefs in shamans and in eight-legged polar bears, and they know the ice, the sea ice, like nobody else. No Western scientists could ever dream to know, because their life has depended, their survival has depended for hundreds of years on knowing the ice. So, and if you ever get into the situation like that, don't let yourself fooled by the appearances. And sometimes it takes a while, or a special occasion like one of these ceremonies, to see how powerful these traditions still are. And the Hopis, they're a little bit of an exception, because they've always been off the main beaten path, up there on their mesas. Like the hippies have been in the 60s, and that's how I got there, I guess, in the 80s. But so if you ever find yourself there, please, be respectful, and don't be a tourist. Don't pull out your camera and take minds pictures. Those are the ones that really stick. A picture that you took and you have hundreds, after a while you look at them, they lose meaning. But and that's what I try to do as a writer. It's to share these stories, but also for me, I could have never preserved this, even if I had been allowed to take pictures at the ceremony. And don't ask me how I recall the detail. I might have surreptitiously, I might have taken some notes, because the impressions were just so overwhelming. It was just, but that's the writer's plight, and I'm not going to complain about that. How we're doing time-wise? I was told I shouldn't go over 40 minutes.
Let me give it a look. We're about 45, so how about we go to questions?
Okay, we can go. I just didn't want to end on a sort of downer note, but
just a little interjection that if you have questions, please use the microphone that's back by Alan that records your questions, so that our archive of the video is complete. I think I'll jump in and ask a question.
yeah, and you can, anything is game here, except of course my private life, which much of it ends up in the books anyway. But if you want to know about the whole how to become a writer, publishing, Alaska, it doesn't have to be about the book specifically, or wilderness guiding. Just don't ask me for any favorite secret hideout spots. I'm not going to share any of that. You buy Backpacker magazine, they always have a list of the 10 least known spots on the Colorado Plateau, so you can get them there.
Michael, my question is, we have friends that are from Germany, and they talk about their childhood really inspiring them to come and check out the Southwest. So I'm wondering what teaser there was that brought you to the U.S. initially.
I'm not even sure if I should share that here because it's an interesting story, but I didn't want to come forever to the Southwest. I always wanted to live up north ever since I was a teenager or even younger, probably too much Jack London at a susceptible age. And so eventually I did up in Alaska, but this is actually where I first set foot in the country in the Southwest. And in the 80s, I don't know if you remember here, the United States did not look, in Europe, they were not very well liked because of the intercontinental ballistic missiles that were being stationed there. And I was sort of kind of prejudiced too. But my mother's sister, she married a GI after the war and moved to Los Angeles. And so I had a landing place there. And I was curious enough, thank God, to wanting to go and check out the place. And then, like I said, when I came here, I was completely blown away. I've lived here in this country longer now than I lived in Germany. I lived 30 some years here, and I came over when I was 30, so that should tell you something. You know, and sometimes I do bitch and complain, you know, what could be better, what's going to hell in a handbasket. And then, you know, people say, well, why don't you go back where you came from? And I say, you know what, the fact that I'm still here should tell you how much I care about this place. And once you stop speaking out, that's when you stop caring about a place, you know. Anyway, I don't know, I've been rambling. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
So, and I was really also impressed with, you know, hitchhiking and being a stranger of the hospitality of the American people. So the public lands, and then just, you know, people would pick me up, not just drive out of the way to drop me where I wanted to go, but some people took me home, introduced me to their family. I even had one guy who had to take off on a business trip, said, here's the house keys, fridge is full, make yourself at home, you know. I mean, that completely, and that's changed a little too. I can tell from, you know, I don't hitchhike that much anymore ever since I got married, so. But hitchhiking is not what it was in the 80s even either. You know, and the best place to get around by thumb is still the reservation. You may end up in the back of the pickup truck with grandma and the dog, but you know, there are people still, because you see people walking there all the time by the side of the road if you do it here, or in, you know, outside of Zion, they look at you like you're some kind of loser. People don't even think that it could be a matter of choice, that you're doing it by choice. And to me, it was just the best possible way that I could have done to meet American people from all walks of life. Because we tend to surround ourselves a lot with people that are like us, but when you're hitchhiking, you meet people from, I had that in guiding too, when I was guiding wilderness trips. You know, of course, they tend to be a little bit more toward the older and affluent end of the spectrum, but I meet people, you know, like from all walks of life that I normally, and I spend intense days with them in the backcountry with bears snooping around. And so you really get to know people really quickly. That's why I like the wilderness too. You really see who the real person is really fast. So that was the long-winded answer to the question.
Other questions?
Nothing.
Microphones. I'm assuming English is a second language,
It is.
and so I'm curious how the language, writing in English and having the German language, because languages are also the way your brain thinks are different in
Right.
different languages. If you could just talk about
Well,
that.
I would actually say at this point, English is my first language, not chronologically, but it's my main language. Some of the vocabulary that I learned here, I would have to look up what the German terms are, because, you know, anything to do with geology or a lot of anthropology. I was relatively fluent in English already when I came, because in anthropology, I did my undergraduate work in Munich, and a lot of the papers we had to write was in English. We had English-speaking instructors, and a lot of the international literature is just English. Is just the lingua franca. So, you know, I had a good base to work from. But the switching doesn't take long, actually, you know. And that's why I was saying, when you want to learn a foreign language or preserve your own native language, you don't learn it so well in school, but on every day, it's full immersion is a method now for language acquisition. You know, you live in that environment, you speak, you hear that language spoken all the time, you have to communicate in that language. You pick it up really quickly, you know. And Yeah, sometimes I try to translate the piece into German when it's getting published in German, or when I call home, and at this point my German starts feeling rustic, not rustic, rusty. And sometimes I have Americanisms. That's where I take a phrase or something and translate it literally, and in German then it sounds totally like, what are you saying, So, one of the last things I still did in German while I was everything, you start dreaming in English, you start thinking in English, my note-taking's in English. One of the last holdouts was math. I still did because I suck at math. I could barely do it in German, so I was still doing my calculations, what little I do in German, but that's all gone now. And like I say, this is just the language I think and live and breathe. And I think it's a beautiful language, because now that I've written so many books in English, and I look at German language, it's this tapeworm sentences, and then you got to get to the end of the sentence to find out the verb, what the action actually is, I don't know, I like English. Sue me,
Okay, so I went through the whole struggle of getting a book published. I'm a block printer. And so I came out with an Aspen book, tried to find a publisher, had a heck of a time, and finally I decided I'm just going to self-publish this against all the negativity about self-publishing that's out there. And I even tried to connect with the Torrey House people, and I knew she wouldn't really be interested because it's an illustrated book.
Right.
Although there is a story there that I've written, and so I did end up publishing it anyway, and had to spend some money to get 500 books published. Mm-hmm. And turns out it's kind of a hit, and people really like it. And I actually have books at the Torrey Gallery, and just anywhere in these mountain towns in Southwest that have aspens. And so, it really speaks to just like, and you probably felt this too, just, in your heart that you think this will work, and I'm not going to listen to anybody else. And maybe you could speak more on that, or just what was your big struggle with self-publishing? I'm still learning this, and there's other books I would like to do. Anyway.
Yeah, no, when my latest book about Nome, like I try to say, it's actually a look at the Bering Strait, and the Bering Strait may sound like an American backwater, but if you go back historically, it's a crossroads between continents, between Asia and North America, and people have been going back and forth and trading, with Russian traders, Cossack traders involved, American whalers, and then the geopolitical situation, World War II, it was a jumping off point for the Lend-Lease program. It was the last place where the planes that the US produced and gave to the Soviets stopped over before they flew over to Siberia. And then during the Cold War, of course, had these distant early warning station system, part of this chain of early warning systems. So it was a hotspot, and it will become a hotspot again, I'm sure, now with the Northwest Passage being ice-free largely, and tourists coming through the Northwest Passage from Europe, and they're building a deep water harbor there in Nome now, because it's going to be geopolitically, with the situation with Russia right now and the race for Arctic resources, it's going to be a hotspot again. But I tried to say Nome is just a lens that I use because I lived there to look at the larger area, and publishers just said, oh, who's interested in this town that a lot of Alaskans don't even know, other than the Iditarod sled dog race takes place there. And I had one guy say, you know what, I have more Facebook followers than Nome has inhabitants, Anyway, so it's really, when you really care that deeply about a subject, whether it's Nome or block printing or something, and you really want to see this, and there always will be other people who like that too, who are niche people, or that's part of the challenge too as a writer. You got to make a topic that people think, why would I read about Nome? And then they hear something about it, or they read something about it. Have you not ever read a book that you said, that's not even a topic that really interests me? That really sucked into it just because the way it was written, and it just gripped you. And that's the responsibility and the possibility. And in self-publishing, I don't have to sell myself to a publisher at all, And sounds like what you did is you did an offset print run where actually you got, where's the woman? 500 books you got printed. So you didn't do print on demand, which is digital, and you can actually order from one copy at a time. So you don't have any warehousing, but they're still very limited when it comes to paper quality. So I don't think for art books, that is not a good option. That's for print books, that's an excellent option.
It turned out really well, actually. So, and I hired a book designer to lay it out.
And that's my next thing. There is still that stigma of self-publishing is a vanity press. It's just an ego. I just want to see my name in print and be a fancy dandy writer. Like that's a good life that you want to live, actually, you know. And I think as self-publishers who are professional, you know, there's the people who said, everybody, oh, I have a book in me. Everybody asks, oh, I have a book. I want to tell a story. And everybody think because they know how to write a letter, they can write a book. And it's really a craft and a trade, and you work hard and then you get better, and you take pride in being professional. And so not every self-published book is the same. And you got to take great care. We are basically sort of like ambassadors that are trying to put out self-published books that are actually good books, you know, that hold up. And part of it is, you know, hiring a professional designer if you don't have the skills, and hiring an editor, make sure that you don't have any typos in there, you know. And then the last part is, which I realized when I was working, when I had my books published with other established commercial presses, they don't invest a lot in marketing the book and publicity. You know, the writer is expected to do a lot. And if you don't, like my first book, Where the Rain Children Sleep, I said, oh, now I'm in print. Now I sit back and I don't have to do events or hustle. I let the publisher do, and the book totally flat out tanked. The thing is, that was my breakout book. That could have been the one that led to bigger books, you know, and I just didn't know the game. And so you expect to do a lot of that yourself if you want your book to sell, because the publishers are just going to list it with Barnes & Noble and Amazon, but people still need to find it there. And there's millions of books there. How are they going to find yours? So you have to be your own publicist and marketer, and you do a lot of that work, and you get to a point where you said, you know what, I'm doing that. I'm writing the book. I'm doing all that promotion. I might as well get a little bigger cut of the percentage of the profits. And it's a full-time job. Publicity, you know, I've done last summer I've been promoting the Alaska books, and much of this summer I've been spending promoting the Utah books down here and the Nome books. So it's a full-time job. And actually, if you're selling 500, I can tell you that, if you're selling 500 copies of a self-published book, you've done great. Because even a lot of specialized university niche titles, some of them, they sell 90 or 100 books, if that. So, and then the question is, are you going to use that to try to snag a bigger publisher? And some people want that for the prestige. You know, I'm with Knopf, or, you know, and you may get big print runs, but half of that print run might get pulped or remaindered if the books don't sell, you know.
Well, I did it because I do these block prints, these limited edition block prints, and it's to sell the prints, which go for $1,200, $1,600.
Yeah.
So it's to sell the prints. That's why I'm doing it, to get my artwork out there.
And you know, the other thing you can do is, where you really stick out from the mass of self-publishing texts or books, is get really good professional reviews. And again, there are reviewers you can pay now. They write your review, but anybody who knows anything about books knows that that's a paid review just by the name of the you know, review outlet, or if it's the New York Times, you know, book review, that you can't pay and get your book reviewed there. So it's, and some of these I have some in the Times Literary Supplement. You know, I get some real good reviews, but I got to hustle, and run after people and pester reviewers.
That's